What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Cashed Out, and today is going to be a little bit of a story time. I'm going to be talking about a couple tips on how to save money when buying camera gear, and I'm going to talk to you about how I lost $2,000 not following these tips, and hopefully these tips will help you not lose $2,000. So you can thank me for that later, and just put the check in the mail. That'll be perfect. Just wanted to basically cover a couple tips that will help you guys out when it comes to buying camera gear, because camera gear is awesome. I don't know about you, but I love watching camera reviews. Like, new gear, new cameras always just excite me. But the problem is that buying all that gear, getting all that gear can get really expensive really quickly. So you want to make sure that you're smart in how you get it. So we're going to get into a couple tips to be able to make that process a little bit smoother for you. So tip number one is to make sure you don't chase specs. Don't chase specs. Now, this is the mistake that I made that cost me $2,000. Just to kind of take you guys back in time, maybe a couple years ago when I was just getting the YouTube thing up and running, I was actually really looking into upgrading my camera. I was actually working with the Canon SL1 at the time, which was fine. I mean, it did the trick. It got the videos up, and I was able to continue to develop my skills with it. But I got really lost in the weeds when it came to looking for a new hybrid camera, because I wanted a camera that was good for photography, but was also good for video. And I kept ending up on the Sony a7R III. If you don't know about the Sony a7R III, it's a beautiful camera. It's fantastic. It's got like a bajillion megapixels. It's really beautiful for photography. It does awesome with video. It can shoot 4K. It's stabilized. It's got all of those bells and whistles going for it. Now, the more I looked into it, the more I got excited about the specs, because in my mind, my thought was I need to get rid of my SL1 so I can get this Sony a7R III so that it'll make my content better. It'll make my footage look better. It'll make my photos look better. I thought that getting that new camera with all those fancy specs that I was chasing would make my content on my YouTube channel better. So I made the mistake. I chased those specs. I ended up buying that camera. I bought the camera in a 24-70 G Master lens, and I ended up spending over $4,000 in total on those two things. So terrible decision, honestly, on my part, because it was something that I did kind of, I guess I would call it an impulse buy, but I was so blinded by the specs that I wanted the specs because I thought the specs would make my work better. But once I got it, I got some cool pictures with it. I was able to do a couple sessions with it. I recorded some videos with it, but it didn't provide what I thought it would provide. My content didn't get better because I didn't get better as a content creator, because I thought having a camera with better specs would make my content better. So first mistake I made was to chase the specs. I ended up having to get rid of that camera. I actually ended up hanging on to the camera too long because I was trying to make it work. I was trying to make it all work out, but it just wasn't working for me. I ended up having to sell the camera. I sold it to K.com, but I only ended up getting about $2,000 for the body and the lens. So I paid $4,000 for it, only got a little, like around $2,000 for both of them back, and I basically lost out on $2,000 because I was chasing the specs. So first lesson, don't chase specs. That can cost you a lot of money because they all look good, they sound sexy, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about the gear you're using. A lot of it really comes down to how you're using that gear. All right, now tip number two is to buy used. Don't be afraid to buy used gear. I know for me, I was kind of scared initially of buying used gear because I thought it was being sold because there's something wrong with it, but that's not the case. In a lot of situations, used gear is actually still pretty solid. And a lot of the people that are selling that used gear in some scenarios would be people like myself who maybe bought the gear and it wasn't what they thought it would be, or they just don't have a need for it anymore. It's not necessarily that the gear is bad, it's just that the person had it before you, right? That's really the only difference in a lot of cases. So most used gear are typically refurbished, they're well maintained, they're well kind of cleaned up, and they still function, right? And you can save yourself a lot of money just buying used gear. Now, be smart. Don't buy things that have dents in them or buy them from sellers that have low credibility. You can find some cool sellers. I think K.com, I just mentioned them earlier. They're a great place to be able to buy and sell camera gear. Adorama, of course, you can always get really good used gear and new gear there as well. But you can also go to like Amazon. Amazon has some pretty good gear. I've bought some 85mm lenses from them a couple times, and I mean, it's been great. It's used, but it's still very well refurbished and works really well. And looking at used gear is a great way to be able to save yourself a lot of money, especially with how expensive camera gear is. Don't be afraid to tap into that used market, because a lot of them, like I mentioned earlier, are just people that are trying to get it off their hands so that they can kind of move on or buy the gear that's more appropriate for them. So tip number two, don't be afraid to buy used. Go ahead and buy that used gear for your camera gear. The last and final tip number three, is is look for other brands. If you own a Sony camera, for example, don't feel like you just need to buy Sony gear. You can actually buy other brands that aren't Sony that manufacture gear for Sony cameras, like flashes or lenses. I know Zeiss, for example, has Sony lenses. A couple that I bought myself were like Tamron or Sigma lenses, and those will work really well for some of my camera bodies. They saved me hundreds of dollars in a lot of scenarios because they did the same thing. I mean, granted, it's a little bit of different quality, but you really have to be like digging in there to see the difference in some scenarios. But you can do the same thing that the name brand lenses can do, but you'll be able to save yourself a lot of money just by going with a different brand, for example. So don't be afraid to look at other brands. There's a lot of cool brands out there that can save you a lot of money and make buying gear a little bit easier. So that's it for today, guys. Hopefully those tips helped you out. Don't blow your money. Don't lose $2,000 like I did by making poor decisions on when and how you buy gear. Be sure to don't chase specs. Be sure to look for used gear and check out other brands. Don't feel like you just need to buy the name brand gear. So hopefully those tips help you out. Hopefully they'll save you some money and save you some headaches. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button below. If you're here and you haven't subscribed yet, please be sure to subscribe. That definitely helps the channel out. And tune in next time right here on Cashed Out. Take it easy, guys.